apresentação da professora Nancy Segal numa entrevista com o professor Claudio Possani.
Hi, you are welcome to USP Panels of Twins USP Panel, in Portuguese, Painel USP de Gêmeos. Today we are going to talk with Professor Nancy Segal. She's a psychologist at State University of California, at Fullerton. And we'll be discussing about twins, science, ethics, and a lot of subjects like this. Nancy, thank you for being with us. It's really a pleasure to have you with us.
The pleasure is mine, Claudio.
Okay. We have also the company of Professor Emma Otto, who is the coordinator of our project. Thank you, Emma, for everything you've been done at our universities in the subject of twins.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Claudio. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And we have also Tania, who also is a psychologist at the University of São Paulo. Thank you, Tania, for being with us and helping us in this interview.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. I'm very excited for this interview.
And we'll discuss Nancy Segal's new book, Deliberately Divided. Nancy, your book discusses a lot about twins. The first question I would like to ask you is, how long have you been dealing with twins, interested in twins, studying twins?
Well, Claudio, I've been interested in twins all my life. I am a fraternal twin with a sister, so my interest started really at the moment of birth, I guess. But I've been studying twins scientifically since I was a senior in college. I did a research paper on twins and really fell in love with the topic, found it so professionally interesting and personally meaningful. And then I pursued twin studies in graduate school as my postdoctoral fellowship and ultimately as my focus as a professor.
Wow, nice, very interesting. And let me ask you another basic questions. Why twins are so important? Why do the scientists want to study twins? What can we learn studying twins?
Well, scientists are very interested in twins because it's a very simple and very elegant model for learning about the genetic and environmental influences on human behavioral and physical development. Identical twins share all their genes, and fraternal twins share half their genes on average. So if we compare samples of identical and samples of fraternal twins with respect to similarity in intelligence or personality or interests, and we find that identical twins are more alike, which we invariably do, this is consistent with the genetic influence on the behavior that we're measuring.
Wow, interesting, quite interesting. Well, your book, Nancy, it focuses on a series of adoptions that occurred in New York in the decade of the 60s through an institution called Louise Weiss Service Child Development. Could you tell us what was the context at that time? What was going on in science and in society?
Well, what happened at that time is that in the 1960s, a couple of things. Adoption was a very quiet, private affair. There was interest in preserving the confidentiality of the adopted families and the biological families who were giving up children for adoption. Being a single mother came with a social stigma. And so the Louise Weiss services in New York City catered largely to Jewish families, not exclusively, but largely to. So if you were a Jewish couple who wanted children, you would go to the Louise Weiss services. And for those women who were having twins, there was a policy formulated at the agency that twins would be better off if they were placed in separate homes for identity issues, and also because it would prevent parental overburdening. So these twins were put in separate families, and at the same time, they were studied quietly and secretly by Dr. Viola Bernard from Louise Weiss and Dr. Peter Neubauer from the Child Development Center at the Jewish Board of Guardians. Both were very prominent psychoanalytic psychiatrist at the time. There was not a great deal of informed consent concerns in the 60s. That really didn't happen in the US till maybe the mid 1970s. But nevertheless, these twins were taken from one another. They were put in separate homes. The parents were never told they were raising a twin child. And in adulthood, these twins learned, often by accident, that they were twins separated at birth and that they had been the unwitting participants in a secret study. These researchers realized that the other studies of twins raised apart that were available studied twins who met as adults. And so when they brought the twins to the lab, they had to reconstruct the childhoods. But the researchers in New York in the 60s thought that if they could study twins right from birth and follow them prospectively, they could get a lot more and better information on nature-nurture than the retrospective approach.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may all sound ideal and justifiable, but from my perspective, it is not, because you are depriving people of knowledge of their birth. You're depriving them of a very significant relationship in their lives. And so the moral question to me is, was this right to destroy this family relationship that these children had? And I think that despite the fact that what they did was probably within legal bounds, the moral transgression outweighs everything.
Yeah, of course, they should ask other people. It's not a decision to be taken by the scientists, of course. And how they follow the twins?
Yeah, a good question. So they had a team of research assistants, some grad students, some doctors, and they would go to the homes several times a year during the early years, and then later once or twice a year as the children got older. And they would administer intelligence tests, personality questionnaires. They would observe them at play. They sometimes watched parent-child interactions. They just accumulated a vast amount of data. And I have all the different tests documented in my book, so people can see what exactly was given to the twins. They deposited all these materials, as you know, at the Yale University archives, and they're not to be released until the year 2065.
Well, that's very strong. And in your book, you analyze a series of cases that the twins, in some way or another, they got together sometime. How was the reaction of these twins when they finally met? They discovered, sometimes by chance, that they had a twin. Were they happy?
Well, the twins were happy to have met one another, that's for sure, because they got along very well. Identicals especially got along extremely well, but the fraternal twins did too. But their happiness turned to anger and bitterness and sadness, because they realized that they had lost so many years together. They never knew they were a twin. A lot of them felt a little bit shy, and they said that they didn't do well in college, and they felt that if they had had their twin with them, this would have given them some social support, making their transition through different life stages a lot easier. And see, Claudio, not only were they deprived of their twinship, but their families were deprived of another child. And this affects not just twins, but it affects parents and other siblings in the family. It has such, and spouses when they get married. It affects so many people. And now the twins, most of them are married, they have children, so they were deprived of in-laws, nieces and nephews. It just has so many cascading effects. You know, another thing too is that when you grow up with a sibling, you have a shared social history, so that if you get angry, you can negotiate, and you know that the next minute, if your sister needs you or your brother needs you, you're there for them. But when you haven't grown up apart, it's easier to walk away sometimes and not talk for months and months. And some of these twins went through that.
And between the several cases you analyzed, which are those that has great impact on you as a researcher, as a psychologist?
Yeah, Claudio, that's an impossible question to answer because they all had an effect in a different way, all of them. I can tell you most recently, there was a fraternal twin. Now, they were not studied, but they were separated. And they did not find out about each other until they were 54. And
54,
one of them,
wow.
yeah, one of them lived out here in California, and the other one lived in New Jersey. So they were 3,000 miles apart. They found out through Ancestry.com. They matched their DNA. And they are the loveliest ladies. They got together. They had a wonderful, beautiful relationship. Unfortunately, the twin in New Jersey passed away in June from a disease. And so they had less than 3 years together. That is so sad. I mean, think about the impact on the surviving twin and on both families. You know, here they meet this wonderful person, and after so many years, and now she's gone again. So it's just devastating. It's just devastating.
Yes, a feeling of having lost a great part of her life. Yes, it is devastating. Yes. And one of the cases you study in your book is the triplets, the two boys.
Yes.
It was a success when they met one another. They went to TV shows. It was something impressive to read about. Your book is very interesting about this case. The three brothers, and at the beginning they were very, very happy on what was going on, but then things became more sad.
Yes, well, when the triplets met, it was through mistaken identity. Two of them met at a college, and then their picture was in the paper, and then the third one suddenly came about. And they got along beautifully. As you say, they were a media sensation. They were all over the place. And for people out there who've seen the film Three Identical Strangers, you'll be more familiar with that case. Now, when it was discovered that they were part of this experiment, things turned very dark. And the idea that they were deprived of one another because of a research project did not sit well with them.
And how was the process that everybody started to know that there had been an experiment?
So a lot of it was shrouded in secrecy. So that now, in terms of their publications, they published 2 or 3 case studies that are highly repetitive. And I've looked at some of them. Very little information about where or when or who and how and all this kind of thing. But in I think it was early in the 1990s, a journalist named Larry Wright, who works for the New Yorker magazine and has several award-winning books out, he stumbled across an obscure study that let him put all of this together, and he figured out that the triplets were separated through the Louise Wise agency and were in this clandestine study. And so when that came out, of course, they were exposed. And as I write in the book, CBS 60 Minutes program tried twice to expose this, and they were unsuccessful for various reasons.
Professor Neubauer is dead right now, right?
Yes, he passed away in 2008.
Yes. And did you get in touch with Viola Berna?
She passed away before he did. But
she passed away also.
Yeah. But I did contact some of their colleagues and some of their relatives. So I do have information about them. And of course, what's interesting is that the New York Times did obituaries on both of them because they were prominent figures in New York City psychoanalytic circles. And neither obituary mentions their twin study. Not one.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And what they were looking for with these experiments, was there some target that's clear? For say they were looking to that kind of knowledge?
Most of all, they wanted to provide the definitive answers to how much of nature and how much of nurture influences development. But they were very interested in how different parenting practices might cause differences in genetically identical children. And they were surprised as time went on at how similar the children turned out to be, despite the fact that the parenting styles were quite different. And that was a shock to them, but it was exciting and exhilarating. I mean, they never expected to find that. They never did. And I'm not surprised by it. We find that identical twins raised apart, the adults that we studied, end up being very similar. And we believe that that's because people react similarly in certain situations. All of us are attracted to certain people, places, and events that are compatible with our genetic predispositions. And the twins do the same, which is why they end up being so much alike. And I can tell you that I have a study of adopted apart twins from China, and I get them at a very young age, and I'm also following them prospectively, but of course with the informed consent of everybody involved. The parents typically come to me because they know I'm doing this work. And it's a very interesting study to look at development in real time. You know, I get the parents and the children's observations and teachers as the kids are getting older. So it's a very interesting process. I think it gives us another perspective on development, but I don't think it's going to reveal anything terribly new. I just don't think so. Maybe in a more dramatic way, but it'll tell us that really genes are important in behavior, and that parents don't create behaviors, they respond to them.
Yeah. Well, Nancy, thank you very much for this interview, and congratulations for the book. It's a wonderful book. I am sure it will be a success. And thank you very much for your time and your interview. It was very nice to talk to you.
Claudio, a pleasure to speak to you as well. I spent some time in Brazil at the University of Sao Paulo. You're in a wonderful place.
Thank you.